So let's see. Okay, so we are
Okay.
recording, and why don't you introduce yourself and tell us who you are?
All right. So I am Melia LaCour, and I am the founder of a business called Becoming Justice. I am, and in that business, I work with multiple organizations in helping them become more racially equitable organizations. So looking at their policies and practices internally, and then looking at how they can better serve their clients, their public in a more racially equitable way. I do a lot of a lot of coaching, a lot of training, a lot of looking at data, a lot of really helping what I like to say people and systems heal from the damage of racism. That's really at the center of my work. I feel like there's been so much damage, and if we're going to have any hope of seeing a different reality, we need to work on our own healing, and that's both our personal healing and then the healing of the systems that we've put into place. And so Becoming Justice is my business, and I'm super grateful every day to have the opportunity to be working with people in that way.
Well, that's great. You mentioned something about about healing,
Yeah.
and it made me think about so much damage that's been done to a person throughout their life, or maybe even some damage that's being done, in the present. It's
Yes.
not easily seen. I mean, people can be having dealing with all kinds of PTSD or drama in their life, or they're being traumatized by something on a regular basis, or maybe they're trying to recover. One thing I want to talk about was how to be an ally to people. So you're in the workplace, or you're in a situation where you're a health provider, you're dealing with somebody who comes in and says, I just got out of a really bad marriage or something, and I was a victim of abuse or something, or maybe a victim of racism or sexism.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that, just in general, tips you can give people about even just how to begin to try and support someone?
That's a great question. Well, I think the thing about allies is that um, what comes with being an ally is that you have privilege. If we're talking about race, then we're talking about white people who have a certain amount, who have privilege in an organization per se, in not just an organization but in society. Some unearned advantage based on skin color, and that comes with some again unearned power and responsibility. I think for making some for pushing organizations and other people to change so that we can heal from the damage of racism or any other forms of oppression. And so I think it's interesting because I was reading something the other day, and I can't remember what it was, so I apologize. But
That's
the writer was saying um, that you don't get to call yourself an ally. It's really something that you have to earn. You have to show people that you're willing to speak up and stand up when you see racism at play. And only then, when you're in that behavior and you're practicing and you're willing to do that on a consistent basis, can you be sort of earning the title of being an ally. So I think that's a really important piece, because I think for white people, there's definitely a process they need to go through to get to a place where they can step into that role, move past defensiveness or any other sort of, tricky sort of protective ways that they've been able to hide from being allies or advocates, and getting to a place where they can really, they've done enough work where they can stand up and they can stand confident in that and be an ally to people of color, that they've earned the title of being an ally.
Well, and
Uh,
and I think when you say earn something, I mean, earning takes time too. It
it
it, it,
does.
it
Yeah.
can't be just, I said, hey, I helped an old lady across the street,
Right.
today, and I'm done for the
Look
month.
at
My
me.
good deed. I
Yeah.
pat myself on the back. I mean, it's a mindset. It's a
Yes.
priority in your life.
Yes.
which leads me to another question about, you hear a lot of, I don't know what you call them, diversity buzzwords or whatever,
Oh my,
like
they're everywhere.
microaggressions,
Microaggression.
and I wonder, well, what is that? I mean, how would you define what a microaggression is, and maybe just give a few examples?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes, not sometimes, I think all the time that title can often be misleading. When we talk about micro, it's like something little, and yet when a microaggression happens, it has a major impact. It can have a major impact, and so I think it's an important thing to point out that while it sounds like a small thing, it's really carries significant weight when we're talking about a microaggression. And how I think of them is really those sort of everyday slights that could be through your speech, through the way what you say or how you behave, that communicate bias towards other people. When we're talking about racial microaggressions, those largely are largely committed by white people, right? Who may feel like in their hearts they're very well-meaning, and yet what they're saying carries the opposite impact. It actually reinforces a bias or stereotype towards people of color. And that can happen, like I said, through speaking or through a behavior. So, when I was younger, my dad's African American, and he would talk about how, walking down the street, women would move out of the way or put their purse on the other side. Like, that's an example of a behavior, right, based on a stereotype that of the dangerous black man, or the criminal, or watching people follow him around the store. Like, those kinds of things are behaviors, and yet the unintended, or the whatever, we don't know what's in the heart of these people, but the message is there's something, that you're a criminal, that there's stereotype there that I'm enacting or acting upon. And so and then they happen verbally as well, right? So many times they come in a almost like a compliment, really. It's really, yeah, it's very tricky the way it works. So again, my dad would tell a story when he was younger about going, in college, going to get a job, and after the interview, the person shook his hand and said, you're very eloquent for a black man.
Oh my goodness.
I know, right?
That's a compliment, right?
That's a compliment to that person, apparently. But the unintended message in there is right, like, well, black men aren't eloquent. You stand above the rest in a way that's unique and rare. And so those kinds of things happen multiple times a day, every day, for people of color, and come in a variety of ways. And when we talk about the impact, again, going back to the word micro, I mean, micro implies something little, and yet it may be better to call it a macroaggression because of, I think, the damage it does to the way we think about ourselves, the way we feel, the way we want to show up in the world. There's a famous quote about death by 1,000 cuts, and I think that's the best way to explain microaggressions. That, maybe one or two microaggressions or one or two paper cuts, it stings and it hurts. Yet after a lifetime of those 1,000 cuts, there's a death that happens, right? There's a death to the love and the care that we think of ourselves, or that we sort of have for ourselves and other people. And so, if you're a person who commits a microaggression and someone has what you would say is an extreme reaction, it's not extreme. It's because there's been a lifetime of experiencing those, 1,000 cuts.
Well, and it's cumulative in that, like you said, over a lifetime, it starts to affect your psyche, your soul, your
Yeah,
spirit. And then,
but
for instance, it makes you see the world in a different way, which can cause the extra added stress. Say, for instance, a person of color driving into an all-white neighborhood.
yes,
I mean, that's a classic situation. And then we have situations like the shooting in Georgia that just happened
yes,
recently,
yes,
where if that guy had been a white jogger jogging down the street, I
absolutely.
don't think it would have gone down like that. But
Hmm.
suddenly it's like, oh, I'm a black guy and I'm out in a different neighborhood, and all of a sudden the cops roll by and want to stop me. This happens on a daily basis
Absolutely.
all over the country. And when that happens enough, there is a wound that occurs
Yeah,
that may never heal. And then you then tell your children, like, we
exactly.
heard about the talk where,
Yes,
black
yes,
people giving their
mhm,
sons and daughters the talk, like when you're out in a certain
yes,
neighborhood, in a certain environment, you have to be really careful. Well, that
mhm,
adds a certain amount of stress and
absolutely.
PTSD in a sense.
Absolutely. Yes, all of those things. I think there's a lack of complete understanding about the damage that these things take on us as individuals, but also our community, the collective. Um,
So I have a question, because I mean, I kind of wrestle with this. How do you
yeah.
find that balance as a person of color where you are aware and woke, and
Mm,
you know kind of what's out there, what you have to deal with, but yet you don't want to be like oversensitive, paranoid, neurotic.
mm,
How do you find that? I mean, it's a personal question. How do you find that?
yeah,
Well, you're not, because 24 hours a day, you don't want to think, I'm a black person. I'm a black.
I know. I know. I mean, I think that's such a great question, and probably I don't know. I think for me, it's almost like a daily practice or something that you have to start. Um, yeah, you have to be. I think you have to start developing coping mechanisms
Mm,
that are healthy. I mean,
mm,
of course, there's all kinds of ways that you try to manage that trauma by yourself that maybe doesn't work well. I think for me growing up, I experienced a lot of racism. I grew up in Kirkland, Washington, and at that time, and still is predominantly white. So I was one of few people of color in my school. Um, and because of that, experienced a lot of racism. And I think for me back then, it was like, well, I'm just not going to talk about it. I'm going to pretend it's not there because it was so obviously painful, but I also didn't know who was safe to talk to about it. Um, we didn't talk about race in our family. So it wasn't something that I felt like I could just go and have a conversation about. And I don't think I really understood it. Like I knew how it made me feel. I knew it was horrific. And yet I think there's a lot of me that that internalized it, right? That internalized it, started to believe, well, yeah, I don't belong, or yeah, there is something wrong with being black. Um, and I think that's the most insidious part, right? Is that the way that internalized racial oppression happens, where slowly over time you start to begin to believe these negative things about yourself. And that's the real damage. And so for me, trying to navigate that or even heal from it has been quite a journey. It's first having a name for it, like, oh, internalized racial oppression. Like I didn't even know what that was until I was in grad school. And once I heard that title, it was like, I don't know, some lights came on. I thought, oh my gosh, I have internalized something that doesn't belong to me. These are not the messages. These are not my messages. This is from society and how they think about Black people. These aren't mine. And so how do you then heal from that? It begins, I mean, I'll just be real. I went to therapy for quite a while to talk through that kind of thing, that damage, that um, I I practice a lot of I write a lot. Um, I practice Qigong, which is a meditative, non-defensive martial art, sort of a
mhm.
healing. kind of a related to Tai Chi a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I do it for a living, right? So for me, it's like, I think I made a choice that once I began to understand the damage to myself and the systems and to my community, it's like, I need to find where I can channel this. And that became my career, right? I've been doing this for, over 15 years. And I think for everyone out there, it's not that you have to have a career around this, but it does need to become part of your world. Whether you're a person of color or a white person, what are we doing to make to channel whatever anger and sadness and grief that we have into a way that we can make change? And for me, at least, that's been a huge that's been medicine, to be honest, is to be able to channel that into change.
And as a coach, I'm not saying you're a coach per se, but what I was thinking in working with therapists and counselors, say you have a white counselor and you have a person of color as a client, and the white counselor really wants to be an ally, and they really want to be honest about the fact that there's a lot they don't know, but that they're there to really help support and understand the client. So
Mm-hmm.
I've often thought it's okay just to be honest and just say,
Yes.
look, I really want to be an ally, but this is a learning experience for me. I mean,
Yes.
What would you say to like a white person who maybe works with a lot of people of color, or that MSW graduate who's going to, hit the streets and save the world? I mean, what would you say to them to just kind of steer them in the right direction?
Yeah, such a great question. Well, first of all, I'm with you on the whole honesty thing. I mean, don't be someone you're not. I mean, I was a therapist actually before I became, I started work as a social worker doing anti-racism work. But as you know, in a therapeutic relationship, authenticity is everything. You can't build a relationship based on any sort of false identity that you're trying to project. And so I'm with you that yes, naming that you would like to be an ally and not sure what that means, and own the responsibility of learning for yourself. That your client is there for support and emotional growth and all of that, and they're not there to teach you. So I think one of my friends, white friends, said it very well many years ago. She does anti-racist work as well. And she said, it's always interesting to me that if white people want to learn, how to do a PowerPoint presentation or learn Excel or, change the oil in the car or whatever, they'll just go on YouTube and Google it and they'll find out information. But they won't necessarily go and Google how to be an ally or just read the plethora of articles that are now available for learning. And so I think there's a lot to that statement, right? That it's a privilege to not have to learn about how you show up in the world or what your skin color means. And I think as a therapist, you have to be aware of your privilege and know that it actually is your responsibility to learn. And so thankfully we're in an era now where so much knowledge is at our fingertips in an instant. And so there's fantastic resources out there. I think now that we are in quarantine, sadly seeing the impact of COVID disproportionately impacting communities of color, there are so many articles and webinars now online to help continue to build people's awareness. So as a therapist, take advantage of the number of resources that are available at a click of a mouse. It's your responsibility to learn. And I would also say that a very powerful strategy or practice really is to have a white ally group or a white caucus where you're meeting with other white people, other white therapists who are wrestling with understanding racism and how it shows up in your client therapeutic relationship. You know, learn together. It's really powerful. And I think just as people of color need their own space, right, to talk through and support one another through the experiences of racism that we have on a daily basis, it's equally as important for white people to have space to talk about those things and to learn together. So I highly recommend that as a strategy. And there's so many great books you can be reading too around white fragility by Robin DiAngelo, and you know, books that will help you further investigate your white identity and how it's impacting your therapeutic relationship. Excuse me.
That's great. A lot of good info. Thank you.